on a subject that is of enormous interest to, I think, almost every American, and that is the future of Social Security in our country. And let me thank all of our panelists for being with us. And let me thank the senators who I know are going to be filtering in as the hearing progresses. My understanding is that Ranking Member Lindsey Graham has a scheduling conflict and will be making his opening statement after our witnesses testify. Is that right? Yep. Okay. Social Security is, I think, as everybody knows, one of the most popular and successful government programs in the history of our nation. For more than 80 years, in good times and bad, Social Security has paid out every benefit owed to every eligible American on time and without delay. And I think it's important to make that point. We live in a moment of great insecurity, and yet Social Security, since its inception, has never failed the American people and remains a program enormously important to them and one that they can rely upon. Not once over more than 8 decades of operation, not during the pandemic that we're in, not during the Wall Street crash, has anyone ever received a letter or a phone call from the Social Security Administration saying, sorry, the economy is not doing well, we need to cut your benefits. Never happened. And if I have anything to say about it, it never will happen. Today, while many people take Social Security for granted, it's been around for a long time, let us remember, before Social Security was created in 1935, about half of our nation's seniors were living in poverty. Today, though the poverty rate is still too high for seniors, that rate is just 8.9%. 50% before Social Security, less than 9% today. Got to do better, but that is a significant improvement. Without Social Security, it is estimated that some 22 million Americans, including more than 16 million seniors, would be living in poverty. Yet, despite this important success, we should be clear that tens of millions of senior citizens are still struggling today to make ends meet, and many older workers are scared to death, literally frightened to death, that they will never be able to retire with any shred of dignity. According to the most recent data that I have seen, 12% of seniors in America are trying to live on an income of less than $10,000 a year. Got that? 12% less than $10,000 a year. I don't know how anyone can live, seniors or otherwise, on less than $10,000. And equally important, 55% of seniors are trying to survive on less than $25,000 a year. Think about that. And when you're a senior, you're dependent on prescription drugs and health care, trying to keep your home warm, trying to make it. On 25,000 years, that's more than half of the seniors in America. Adding insult to injury, and this is an enormously important point that I think we don't make often enough, about half of older Americans, those who are 55 years of age and older, have no retirement savings. Got that? You're 55 years of age in America, you've worked your whole life, you got zero in the bank for when you retire. And they are dependent on a Social Security benefit today that is less than $1,540 a month on average. Now, despite what some politicians have been saying for years, Social Security today is not on the line going broke. Social Security has a $2.85 trillion surplus in its trust fund and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 13 years, okay? Social Security, you pay out all your benefits for the next 13 years. But what the actuaries want, what I want, what I think most people want is more than 13 years. The actuaries talk about 75 years being the kind of number that we should have as we go forward. After that 13 years, Social Security estimates that there will be enough funding, Social Security Administration estimates that there will be enough funding available to pay 80% of promised benefits. So you got all benefits for the next 13 years, 80% after that. Now, given that reality, our job, in my view, is not to cut Social Security, is not to raise the retirement age, as many of my Republican colleagues would have us do. Our job is to expand Social Security so that everyone in America can retire with the dignity that he or she deserves, and that every person in this country with a disability can retire with the security they need. And that is what the Social Security Expansion Act that I have introduced today, along with Senators Warren, Whitehouse, Merkley, Van Hollen, Padilla, Booker, and Gillibrand, is all about. This legislation has been endorsed by many, many organizations, including the AFL-CIO, the Alliance for Retired Americans, Social Security Works, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the American Federation of Teachers, and many, many other organizations. According to a letter, this is an important part of what this hearing is about today, according to a letter that I received from the Social Security Administration this morning, this legislation will fully fund Social Security for the next 75 years and expand benefits for senior citizens and people with disabilities. Now, how do we do that? How do you expand benefits and make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, which is, I think, what the American people want? Well, the answer is not complicated. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, at a time when billionaires pay an effective tax rate lower than the average working person, at a time when the very richest people in this country are becoming much richer, this legislation demands that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. Today, absurdly and grossly unfairly, there is a cap on income subject to Social Security taxes. That cap is now about $147,000 a year. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you are a multi-billionaire, you pay the same amount of money into Social Security as someone who makes $147,000 a year. Got that? It means that if you make $147,000 a year, you pay 6.2% of your income in Social Security taxes. But if you make 10 times more than that, $1,470,000, you pay 0.6% of your income in Social Security taxes. All of this is taking place at a time of massive income and wealth inequality. Now, that may make sense to somebody. It does not make sense to me. Our legislation applies the Social Security payroll tax on all income, including capital gains and dividends, for those who make over $250,000 a year. Under this legislation, 93.6% of households would not see their taxes go up by 1 penny. So the overwhelming majority of the American people would not see any increase in their taxes under this proposal. The tax increase in our legislation only applies to the wealthiest 6.4% of all Americans, those who make $250,000 a year or more. Further and importantly, under this bill, Social Security benefits would be increased by $2,400 a year for both new and existing recipients, lifting millions of seniors out of poverty. In addition, under this bill, we would increase COLAs for senior citizens by more accurately measuring the spending pattern for senior citizens through the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. Now, one of the reasons that I called this hearing, and I'm glad that Senator Graham has been able to be here, is that there is, in fact, a strong philosophical difference between many of us in the Democratic caucus and many in the Republican caucus as to the best way forward with regard to Social Security. And that's kind of the discussion we're going to have today. While virtually all members of the Democratic caucus are on record in support of expanding Social Security benefits, the Republicans, by and large, have taken a very different approach. And I'm delighted, and I hope they will show up, that some of the Republicans who have taken strong positions on this issue, I see Senator Romney's here, and I'm glad that is the case. Look forward to hearing from him. That some of the Republicans who have taken strong positions on this issue are on this committee. And I know that they're going to be explaining where they come from, and I look forward to that debate. Earlier this year, Senator Rick Scott, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, released a plan that would sunset Social Security every 5 years, raise taxes on millions of seniors, and jeopardize the guaranteed income of 65 million Americans who depend on Social Security. Just a few months ago, the Republican Study Committee in the House introduced a bill that would raise the Social Security retirement age to 69 years of age over the next 8 years and privatize Social Security by allowing employers to divert payroll tax dollars into less generous private retirement accounts. Last year, Senator Romney, who is here with us, has opposed raising taxes on the wealthy to strengthen Social Security, introduced legislation to form a committee to propose cuts to Social Security behind closed doors. In 2020, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell told a Bloomberg reporter that, quote, he hopes to work with the next Democratic president to trim Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, end quote. In 2011, my colleague Senator Graham introduced legislation to raise the full retirement age to 70 by 2032 and index it to longevity. Further, in 2003, Senator Graham introduced a bill that would have cut Social Security benefits for current wage earners by 27%, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Now, as I think everybody knows, I don't often agree with former President Donald Trump. But this is what he said when he was campaigning for president in 2015, and he was right. He said, quote, every Republican, this is in the Republican primary, every Republican wants to do a big number on Social Security. They want to do it on Medicare, and they want to do it on Medicaid, end quote. Well, let me be clear, we cannot allow that to happen. The vast majority of the American people understand that a moral society does not give tax breaks to billionaires and then cut back on the needs of struggling seniors or people with disabilities. In fact, 72% of Americans support increasing, not cutting, Social Security benefits by asking millionaires and billionaires to pay more into the system. So that is where we are right now. It's a great philosophical difference. I look forward to the debate. Some of us think that the very wealthiest people in this country are doing extraordinarily well, should in fact be asked to pay more into Social Security so we can protect millions of low-income and struggling seniors. Others disagree. And with that, I'm glad that Senator Graham has been able to come. Senator Graham.
Well, number one, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a hearing worth having. And I take a different view about how to save Social Security. Mine's more realistic. Yours is a fantasy, but the problem is real. And you're a good man. You're consistent. Every time there's a problem, tax the rich. Count me in for more revenue. We're going to need more revenue. But if you think taxing the wealthy is going to save Social Security, you're wrong. So where are we with Social Security? By 2034, according to the recent trust fund report, the money in Social Security will require us to reduce benefits so that you can get only 77% of the benefits you owed because we're paying out more than we're taking in. That's a fact. It slipped a year, but we're on a glide path where over time, Senator Romney knows this, the money being paid in and the money taken out doesn't add up. And if you don't do something now, you're going to have a draconian choice of cutting benefits and raising taxes to keep the thing afloat. But here's the good news. We got some time if we act together. And here's the model I would suggest, the Reagan-O'Neill model. And I think it's in the 80s, Greenspan Commission was formed by President Reagan. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan were known to have a drink together. And apparently during one of those discussions, they said, well, let's do something about Social Security because it's going broke. So they got Alan Greenspan and a bunch of folks to come up with some ideas. They did a little more on the revenue side, but they adjusted the age of retirement over time from 65 to 67. I just got my first Social Security check a few months ago. I was eligible 66, I think, in 2 months. In my case, when I was 21 and 22, my mom and dad died within about 15 months of each other. I had a 13-year-old sister. We moved in with an aunt and uncle who worked in textile plants in South Carolina. Probably never made over $30,000 in her life. The survivor benefit portion of Social Security for my sister until she got 18 really helped us get by. Now I am 66, soon will be 67. I have a good salary. I have a military retirement. I have a congressional pension plan. If you ask me to take a little less to save Social Security for people who need it more than I do, count me in. And it's going to take that kind of commitment from all of us. The wealthier people are going to have to take a little less in benefits. Younger people are living longer, so we're going to have to adjust the age probably once again. But here's the fact. In 1955, when I was born, there were 8.6 workers for every retiree. In 1990, there was 3.4. In 2022, there's 2.8. By 2050, there's 2.2. Senator Romney's done everything he can personally to save Social Security. If you ever go to the Romney family reunion, you'll see a lot of people going to pay into Social Security. I have let you down. I'm not married with no kids. It's people like me screwing this thing up. So the bottom line here is that we have fewer people working for the number of people retired, and if that doesn't create a problem, then I think you're missing the point. 2.2 people by the middle of the century are not going to generate the amount of money necessary to keep the fund solvent if we don't make some changes. So what are the changes that Simpson, Bowles, the Gang of Six, kind of bipartisan people have looked at? Adjusting the age of retirement, increasing revenue, and trying to make the benefit structure more efficient. So I don't need a lecture about Social Security. I understand the value of the program because when I was 22, lost both parents, had a 13-year-old sister to take care of, the money really mattered. It matters to a lot of people on retirement. It's their primary source of income. I'm at a stage now where I could wouldn't change my lifestyle to have a smaller COLA for me, maybe none at all, but smaller for sure, and to restructure the benefit schedule so the money will be there for people who need it more than I do. I don't know how to solve this problem without all of us working together. I know that what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did in the 1980s worked for a while. We got to do that again. They didn't go to the approach of Senator Sanders of just taxing the wealthy because it's not going to work as a standalone proposition. So the country is in a world of hurt. Our financial house is not in order. By 2031, we'll have $2 trillion in annual deficits. The national debt by 2032 will be $40 trillion. By 2052, debt to GDP will be 185%. That's a separate problem from Social Security, but Social Security is sort of consumed in that. Now, the trustee report assumed something about the viability of the trust fund, Mr. Chairman. They assumed about a 3.5% inflation rate. Well, we know now that that's not exactly what's going on. Interest rates are going up. Inflation rates are at 8%. Every increase in interest rates is about $200 billion debt service. So we're on a trajectory now. There we go. We're on a trajectory where inflation is higher than anticipated, which puts stress on the trust fund. Interest rates are going up, which will put stress on the economy. So what I propose we do is have this discussion. You can blame us if you would like, but you're not going to be able to blame me for not caring because I do. And I will challenge your assumptions about how to save the system, understanding you're a patriotic American and you want to do what you think is best. But in your world, we're all the bad guys and you figured this out. You haven't figured it out. What you're selling doesn't work. And we'll have a good discussion about what will work. It will be bipartisanship. It won't be the Sanders plan. It won't be individual private accounts. That might be part of the mix. Who knows? The bottom line is we're going to have to make some hard decisions. I stand ready to make those hard decisions. Senator Romney has been terrific. Senator Romney wants somebody outside of politics to give us some information, like we had with Simpson Bowles, like we had with the Gang of Six, to adjust Social Security and stop it from running out of money by 2034 and having to reduce benefits. And I think he and others on our side, and people on your side, quite frankly, are willing to do this. And I would invite President Biden to be part of it. I would love to be able to sit down with the administration and see if we can recreate the momentum for Simpson Bowles or the Gang of Six, where we put on the table something of everything, where everybody has to give a little bit to save a system worth saving. So if this is an election year issue, great. I think it needs to be talked about, and we're going to talk about it in terms on our side that is a little more holistic than just tax the rich. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham, and I look forward to this discussion. We have an excellent panel with us, and following this panel, we are going to hear from Mr. C Goss, who is the Chief Actuary with the Social Security Administration, to tell us where we're at and what the plan that I have proposed would mean for the future of Social Security. We have 5 great panelists with us. We're going to begin with Ms. Nancy Altman. Ms. Altman is president and co-founder of Social Security Works. She also chairs the board of directors of the Pension Rights Center. Ms. Altman is a member of the Social Security Advisory Board, an independent government agency to which she was appointed by Speaker Pelosi. Ms. Altman, thanks very much for being with us.
Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committee. Thank you, Chairman Sanders, not only for holding this crucially important and aptly named hearing, but also for your authoring the Social Security Expansion Act. It is legislation that greatly increases the economic security of all working families, including the economic security of every single one of Social Security's more than 65 million beneficiaries. As every trustee's report makes clear, whether to expand benefits or cut them is a matter of values, not affordability. At the end of the century, Social Security is projected to cost less than 6% of gross domestic product. To put that 6% in perspective, spending in response to COVID has amounted to over 27% of GDP. At the height of the Vietnam War in 1967, we spent more than 9% of GDP on the military. Moreover, our nation will be much wealthier at the end of the 21st century, just as we are wealthier now than we were 75 years ago. That means that around 6% of GDP will be easier to afford in the future. Importantly, Social Security does not, and by law cannot, add even a penny to the deficit. As polarized as Americans are over many issues, your constituents agree about Social Security. Poll after poll finds that an overwhelming majority of Americans, Republicans as well as Democrats and independents, believe that Social Security is more important than ever. They strongly oppose any and all cuts. They want to see benefits expanded, and they want the wealthiest to pay their fair share. What the American people want is extremely wise policy. Social Security ensures workers' wages against risks that confront us all. Rich or poor, any of us can die prematurely, leaving young children. Rich or poor, any of us can suffer a disabling accident or illness. Rich or poor, all of us hope to live to old age. Social Security protects us against all of these financial risks through its life insurance, disability insurance, and joint and survivor retirement annuities. It does it more efficiently, securely, universally, effectively, and fairly than its private sector counterparts. But it does not do so adequately. The Social Security Expansion Act is a solution The nation is facing a retirement income crisis. Expanding Social Security is the answer. Expanding Social Security while requiring the wealthiest to pay more is also part of the answer to the nation's rising, destabilizing income and wealth inequality, which President Obama called the defining challenge of our time. The Social Security Expansion Act substantially increases Social Security's modest benefits. It not only pays for every penny of improvements, but also ensures that Social Security benefits can be paid in full and on time for 3/4 of a century and beyond. It does so while imposing not one penny of additional cost on anyone earning under $250,000. The legislation is profoundly wise, though I believe benefits should be expanded more and multimillionaires and billionaires be required to pay more. Congress has not expanded Social Security benefits in half a century. President Roosevelt called Social Security a cornerstone in a structure which is being built, but is by no means complete. For the first 35 years, Congress expanded Social Security every few years, but it has not expanded those benefits in half a century. It is time to act. Congress must address Social Security in the sunshine through regular order, as it always has. That way, the American people will know where their elected representatives stand. An excellent place to start is a vote in the Senate before November on the Social Security Expansion Act. Thank you.
Ms. Altman, thank you very much. Next panelist is Mr. Robert Roach Jr. He is the president of the Alliance for Retired Americans and former General Secretary-Treasurer of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Mr. Roach has served as an auditor for the International Trade Union Confederation and is a board member of the Pension Rights Center. Mr. Roach, thanks very much for being with us.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Robert Roach. I'm the president for the Alliance for Retired Americans and the former General Secretary-Treasurer of the Machinists Union. Our organization has 4.4 million American retirees, and we are represented in 39 separate states. We believe categorically that the importance of improving Social Security cannot be overstated because the index for determinant of cost of living adjustments has not kept pace with inflation. People on Social Security are suffering and unable to be self-sustaining. We need improvements because older Americans today are hurting. I've seen examples firsthand on many occasions when seniors go to the checkout counter at the supermarket and buying the same type of items that they bought for years can no longer afford them and have to put food back on the shelves. Seniors are having to make decisions between food and medicine on a daily basis. These are just a few examples that clearly underline the country's desperate need to expand Social Security benefits. I will add that after 40 years of work and playing by the rules, my retirement benefit from the airline, TWA and American Airlines, is $311 a month. $311 a month. And tens of thousands of people that I work with are now functioning with $300 to $500 a month and are depending on Social Security just to make ends meet. In addition, most seniors who are in financial difficulty are depending on their children to financial help and to provide medical assistance. This is stifling our younger people. We are creating a generation, the next generation of poor people. Attached to my statement is a statement from Ms. Christina Brown, who had opportunities to go to Ivy League colleges on scholarship, who had many opportunities to advance herself to become a doctor, had to stop going to school, borrow money to pay the mortgage on the family home because her parents, her mother, was not self-sustaining as a result of many issues. 40% of our youth are under those conditions. We must do something, Senator Sanders. Women who take on the role in their families, people like her sister, both people, played by the rules, did what they were supposed to do, cannot be self-sustaining. Given the decline of traditional pension plans and the ability to accumulate savings because of stagnant real wages. Greater numbers of Americans rely on Social Security in retirement. Nearly 50% of retired Americans today rely on Social Security for half of their income, while 1 in 7 over the age of 65 do so for 90% of their income. Moreover, Social Security benefits are not keeping pace with inflation. The Social Security cost of living adjustment is inadequate and is not representative of the true measure of inflation that seniors face when they buy. As of April, the average monthly Social Security benefit for a retired worker was a modest $1,666. As we saw in the Social Security and Medicare Trustees report released just last week, Social Security will be able to afford scheduled payments until 2034, at which point the fund's reserves will be depleted and payroll taxes will only cover 77% of what is owed. Senator Sanders' legislation, the Social Security Expansion Act, which the Alliance strongly supports and is proud to formally endorse, addresses these challenges by doing the following: extending the solvency of Social Security by requiring the wealthiest of American households to pay their fair share of Social Security taxes, expanding Social Security benefits across the board, increasing the cost of living adjustments by adopting the Consumer Price Index for the elderly, CPIE, updating the special minimum benefit for Social Security recipients by making it easier to qualify and assisting low-income workers to stay out of poverty. The Alliance has also endorsed Connecticut Congressman John Lawson's legislation in the House, H.R. 5723, Social Security 2100, a Sacred Trust Act, which also makes Social Security even stronger and repeals the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset, both of which are unfairly claw back the Social Security benefits of workers, their spouses, or survivors if they work for a period of time in jobs not covered by Social Security. The time to expand Social Security is now. I want to once again thank the committee for inviting the Alliance to participate in today's important hearing. The Alliance stands ready to work with the Senate and the House in any way possible to improve benefits for retired Americans. Thank you.
Mr. Roach, thank you very much. Next panelist is Mr. Alex Lawson, who is the Executive Director of Social Security Works, the convening member of the Strengthened Social Security Coalition, a coalition made up of over 340 national and state organizations representing over 50 million Americans. Mr. Lawson, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and other members of the committee. I'm going to do a bit of a history lesson, I think. In 1935, Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law. And for the next 87 years, Social Security has never missed a single payment. Everybody loves Social Security. Everybody. I've been all over this country talking about Social Security, and I can tell you it doesn't matter if it's a room full of camo NRA hats or a parking lot full of electric vehicles. Everybody loves Social Security. That's not actually totally true. Not everybody. There's always been a sliver, a tiny splinter group, a vanishingly small number of people who hate it with every fiber of their being. These are Wall Street people. They see the trillions of dollars the system has put in the pockets of the American people, and they say, hey, I want that money in my pocket. And as there are money men who hate Social Security, there are politicians willing to say how high at their commands to jump. The first was named Alf Landon. In 1936, he ran against FDR on an explicitly anti-Social Security platform. He called it a hoax, a fraud. He said it was filled with worthless IOUs that would never get to the people. And yet 87 years later and $11 trillion later going to the people, Social Security is still here making payments every month like clockwork. And Alf Landon is only remembered as the man who lost 48 states when he ran for president. After that, for the next few decades, the majority of Republicans understood Social Security as a birthright and a cornerstone of economic security for all Americans, not a partisan football. My favorite is President Eisenhower, in a letter to his brother saying this: should any party attempt to abolish Social Security, you will not hear of that party again in our political history. There is a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. their number is negligible, and they are stupid. But unfortunately, that greedy splinter faction never stopped plotting. And that faction today has taken over the entire Republican Party. Ronald Reagan was possibly the last Republican president who was not totally under their sway. And he stated with clarity, Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. Social Security is totally funded by the payroll tax levied on employer and employee. If you reduce the outgo of Social Security, that money would not go into the general fund to reduce the deficit. It would go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security has nothing to do with balancing the budget or lowering or erasing the deficit. But the splinter group has patience and money, lots of money, and politics loves money. So after the 1983 reforms, they began waging a new type of war against Social Security. The main tactic being lying to the face of the American people about what it is they are doing. So now, you'll never hear from Republicans that they want to destroy Social Security. You'll never hear that they want to cut benefits. In fact, they always start their assaults on Social Security with protestations of love. I love Social Security. I'm just worried it's not going to be there for us in the future. The goal of this is to convince people that they're going to get nothing so that they will accept less than they're owed. They cloak their attacks under new monikers. George W. Bush called for just handing our Social Security over to Wall Street. He called it privatization. But again, it's just destruction. It just destroys Social Security. Imagine if George W. Bush had given our Social Security to Wall Street in 2006, 2 years before Wall Street collapsed the world economy. And we saw 401ks turned into 201ks. Social Security would be gone if he had got his way. And it wasn't just him. The entire Republican Party was complicit. Senator Ron Johnson said as recently as 2015 that it was a shame the Bush plan to destroy Social Security didn't succeed. Senator Lindsey Graham, who supported the privatization effort too, has proposed a bill cutting Social Security benefits by 21%. He hides that policy by saying he's raising the retirement age. Senator Graham just laid out that the problem with Social Security is that if nothing happens, benefits are going to go down 23%. But Senator Graham's solution is to cut benefits by more than that. So that's not a solution, that's just the problem sooner. And that's not an outlier. The Republican platform in 2016 says with coded language, the plan is to cut benefits and hand over Social Security to Wall Street. As Republicans, we oppose tax increases and believe in the power of markets to create wealth, is what it says. Senator Romney recently tried to get an up or down vote in the dead of night on his so-called Trust Act, which would create an undemocratic, fast-tracked, closed-door process to cut Social Security. They know it is so toxic to talk about what they want, they tried to legally create a smoky back room where they can figure out the best way to rob people of their earned benefits. Which brings us to the current Republican agenda as set out by Chairman of National Republican Senatorial Committee, Senator Rick Scott. I'm sorry, can I have 30 more seconds, Senator? I will have to give this plan faint praise because at least it has a hint of honesty about it. Senator Scott's plan would sunset Social Security in 5 years. Rick Scott is the modern-day Alf Landon. He hates Social Security and wants to eliminate it, but even he isn't brave enough to say that and calls it sunsetting. In fact, the Republican who was most honest was Donald Trump, who Bernie Sanders brought up, who said that all the Republicans want to do a big number on Social Security.
Mr. Lawson, at the time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ms. Maya McGinnis, who is president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. Her areas of expertise include budget, tax, and economic policy. Ms. McGinnis, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the importance of making Social Security solvent and various ways to do so. I will briefly touch on 3 things that are done more in depth in my written testimony. but I'd like to talk about Social Security's financial condition, the cost of waiting to fix the program, and some of the objectives for reform. So, first, as we've already talked about, the most recent trustees report tells us that Social Security is headed towards insolvency. Of course, that is not news. We have known this for more than 30 years. And yet, in that time, we have basically done nothing to make the program shore it up so that it's financially solvent. We now have a situation where the combined trust funds will be insolvent by around 2035, when today's 54-year-olds reach full retirement age. So the one thing we know that increases anxiety is uncertainty, and that is what people have today about the future of Social Security. Upon insolvency, all beneficiaries, everyone, millionaires, and people who depend on Social Security for their entire livelihood will receive benefit cuts across the board to 20%, and that will grow over time. So I can point to a lot of good proposals over the years. This is clearly not one of them. Every year we wait, and that we have waited has made the changes more difficult and more painful. In 2010, you could have achieved 75-year solvency by eliminating the taxable maximum or price indexing benefits. Today, neither of those will be sufficient. In 2010, the Simpson-Bowles plan was going to phase in all of its policies over 40 years. Today, the same type of plan would have to be phased in 5 to 10 years. So continued delay will make the needed changes even larger while giving participants even less time to prepare. So, what should the goals of reforming the system be? And there are plenty of different objectives, and that's part of the reason we should have compromise. What I believe needs to happen is that we need to make the program solvent before we expand benefits. I think we need to protect those who depend on the program. I think we should make changes that encourage economic growth wherever possible. And finally and importantly, I think we have to think about this comprehensively. So recognizing that Social Security is one of many national priorities, and that acknowledging that there are trade-offs between funding for Social Security versus other priorities such as investment in children, climate, national security, and many other priorities. As to the first objective, there are plans out there that would expand benefits and fail to make Social Security solvent. This is akin to saying to seniors, we will promise you even more while we know that we cannot even pay you what we have already promised. This is dangerous and it's disingenuous. Second, I think it makes sense to make these changes progressively, and the options to do this include things like lifting the tax cap, means testing, progressive price indexing, and/or adding minimum benefits along with other changes to enhance solvency. On this objective, I find it really hard to understand those who advocate more in taxes on the rich while ruling out slowing the growth of benefits for the same people. Changes will have to be made. If wealthy beneficiaries are held harmless, others will have to face more in benefit reductions or pay more in taxes. And the more we do this by raising their taxes, rather than reducing benefits, the less revenue from that group will be available for other priorities. You can only tax millionaires and billionaires so many times. Another useful objective is to include changes that create incentives for work, savings, and growth. This is particularly important because of the economic challenges we face because of the aging of the population. Finally, it's very important to look and think about Social Security in the context of the full budget as well as an independent program. Already, the federal government spends roughly $6 per senior on every one it spends for children. So we need to think holistically about whether we want to widen that gap or we want to narrow that gap. There's both a financial and a political budget constraint in overall spending, and by contemplating programs in isolation, you bypass the consideration of those trade-offs. The right and the best way to start this discussion is to pass a budget. In my written testimony, I include a list of options and links to our interactive tool, the Social Security Reformer, which you can use to craft your own plan. Many members of Congress and citizens have used it to weigh in on how they would like to fix the program. In the past, we have worked to develop a number of plans and work with members of Congress to do so. Right now, process-wise, I think the single best idea out there is the Trust Act. Senator Romney has worked on this, and it's bipartisan and bicameral. And what's so appealing about it is that everything is on the table. In order to get out of the special committees that would look at how to save these programs, the proposals have to be bipartisan, and you would still have the same threshold in the Senate to pass any reforms. So there's no single right way to make Social Security solvent. However, the wrong thing to do is to continue to do nothing. So we would be delighted to work with any office that's interested in working on Social Security to develop a plan for solvency. We would be particularly interested to do so, that anybody's willing to do it on a bipartisan basis. Thanks again for having me here today.
Ms. McGinnis, thank you very much. Mr. Chai Akabas, is that, did I get it right?
Akabas. It's a tough one.
Is it Akabas?
Akabas.
Akabas, okay. Is the Director of Economic Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Mr. Abakas has conducted research on a variety of economic policy issues, including the federal budget, retirement security, and the financing of higher education. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate you having me here to testify today about the long-run sustainability and efficacy of Social Security. I commend the committee for focusing on this critical issue. My name is Shia Kabas, and I'm the Director of Economic Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center, a nonprofit organization founded in 2007 by 4 former Senate Majority Leaders, Howard Baker, Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, and George Mitchell. Our organization combines the best ideas from both parties to promote health, security, and opportunity for all Americans. Social Security serves as the foundation upon which most Americans build their lives in retirement. For 85 years, it has paid out benefits to people with disabilities, older people, and their family members, lifting millions of households out of poverty and providing essential financial support. But Social Security faces a serious challenge. The benefits being paid out are outpacing the program's income, which primarily comes from payroll taxes. The recently released 2022 Trustees Report underscores this fact, projecting that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, or OASI, is on track to deplete its reserves in 2034. My testimony will summarize the ominous outlook facing Social Security today and highlight a package of bipartisan reforms that could address these challenges. I hope our conversation leaves you with the following takeaways. Number one, time is running out. To address this problem, Congress must act quickly and in a bipartisan fashion. Delaying necessary reforms will only serve to make them more politically difficult and cause added uncertainty for workers and retirees. Two, there's no silver bullet. Several factors play into Social Security's financial imbalance, requiring a nuanced and thoughtful package of reforms. Three, enhancing Social Security benefits, particularly for those who most rely on them in retirement, and putting the program on a fiscally sustainable path are not mutually exclusive. Rather, tackling both goals simultaneously will be vital to garner the necessary bipartisan support. For several decades, starting in the 1980s, Social Security's income exceeded its expenses, which led to a large buildup in the program's OASI trust fund. Unfortunately, that dynamic has flipped, and annual benefits now exceed dedicated revenue, a situation that is projected to persist indefinitely. After the OASI trust fund runs out of reserves in 2034, incoming revenue will only cover 77% of the program's obligations, resulting in abrupt benefit cuts that would be devastating for many beneficiaries. The recent Trustees Report contains some sobering conclusions. To ensure solvency of the combined trust funds through the 75-year projection period, Congress would need to immediately raise the payroll tax rate by more than 3 percentage points, reduce benefits for all current and future beneficiaries by around 20%, or adopt some combination of those approaches. If policymakers wait, much larger changes will be required. The alternative is an unprecedented departure from the pay-as-you-go structure of Social Security, were Congress to begin allowing the program to permanently draw from general government revenue. This would sacrifice Social Security's special status as a program walled off from the rest of the budget, making it compete for resources with other priorities at a time when the nation's fiscal house is already in rough shape. This would be irresponsible policymaking. Before outlining possible solutions, I want to describe the 2 principles that must guide any reforms to the program. 1, acting as soon as possible is paramount. The longer Congress waits to strengthen Social Security's finances, the more drastic the changes will have to be, and the more burden will fall upon those who played little or no role in creating the imbalance facing the program today. The lack of action by policymakers is also especially unfair to the millions of Americans who are trying to plan for their retirement. Failing to enact reforms will simply kick the can down the road, pushing responsibility for a long-term solution onto future lawmakers, who will have to decide between inconceivable benefit cuts, impractical tax increases, or the abandonment of the program's historical financing mechanism. Number 2, any legislative action must garner significant bipartisan support. Working across the aisle is not only generally best practice for enacting durable policies, but also a necessity for changes to Social Security, which requires a supermajority in the Senate. Lawmakers should abstain from pronouncements like no new tax increases and no benefit cuts, whether they apply across the board or for certain subsets of the population. Red lines such as these only put obstacles in the way of action. Social Security's financial challenge affects nearly our entire society, and the solutions will require a broad-based approach. In 2016, BPC convened a bipartisan commission co-chaired by former Senator Kent Conrad and Jim Lockhart, the former Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. The Commission spent 2 years studying the status of retirement security in America and made recommendations in 6 key areas. One of those was strengthening Social Security's finances and modernizing the program. The Commission's reforms were projected by the Chief Actuary to make Social Security solvent for 75 years and beyond, thereby avoiding the benefit cuts that are set to take effect. It would also enhance benefits for vulnerable populations and give Americans certainty about what to expect from the program as they prepare for retirement. The package tackles Social Security's financial gap through a balanced mix of new revenue and benefit restraints. I'd encourage you to review their specific recommendations in my written testimony and would be glad to discuss them further during the Q&A. Beyond making Social Security financially sound, enacting this plan would dramatically increase the progressivity of the program, reducing poverty among vulnerable populations such as low-income retirees and surviving spouses. Over a lifetime, the average household in the bottom 2 quintiles of earners would receive higher benefits than scheduled levels under these proposed reforms, and middle earners would receive benefits roughly at scheduled levels. Nearly all net benefit savings in the plan would come from beneficiaries in the top 2 quintiles of the lifetime income distribution, staying true to Social Security's mission as a social insurance program. Although this framework represents a comprehensive approach to restoring solvency, it was recommended 6 years ago. Since then, the problem has grown and the time to address it has shrunk. To restore long-term solvency today, policymakers would either need to phase in these policies much more rapidly, increase the size of the proposed adjustments, or incorporate additional benefit or revenue changes. Let me be clear. If Congress waits another 6 years to act, it will become nearly impossible to retain Social Security's traditional structure without aggressively curtailing benefits for current beneficiaries. Finally, I'll note that PPC's Commission report is far from the only solvency plan that has been proposed in recent years. In fact, several have been submitted by current members of Congress, including Chairman Sanders. All these members deserve significant credit for putting forth credible solutions to this politically vexing challenge. But as mentioned, the ultimate fix will need bipartisan support. So while components of these proposals can be part of a package, compromise will be necessary. I want to conclude by thanking the committee once again for convening this hearing. Social Security solvency often feels like an intractable problem, but with your continued leadership and bipartisan collaboration, progress is possible. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Let me begin the questioning with a question from Ms. Altman. As you know, I've just introduced legislation to expand Social Security benefits by $200 a month and to fully fund Social Security for the next 75 years by demanding that Americans who make more than $250,000 a year pay their fair share of taxes. As an example of the absurdity of the current situation, just as an example, last year the CEO of Apple made over $700 million in total compensation. He pays the same amount of money into Social Security as someone who makes $147,000 a year. Does that make any sense to you, Ms. Altman?
Absolutely not. And the American people are very clear about this. They, as I say, they are quite in agreement with what you're proposing.
Mr. Roach, an important point that you made in your testimony is that Social Security benefits are not adequate today to ensure retirement with dignity for every American. You note that you have seen, as I have seen, seniors put food back at the supermarket checkout because they could not afford their grocery bill. How would the bill that we are talking about today help senior citizens better able to live with security and dignity? What would it mean to the average person?
It would mean a great deal, Chairman Sanders. The $2,400 a year would be a great benefit, especially those who only have, the only other income they have is maybe $300 or $400, $500 a month. Be able to afford food, properly obtain some of their prescription drugs that they're deferring at this particular point, and changing the COLA to keep price with inflation would be extremely, extremely important, especially in today where the inflation is surging. And I personally, I guess everybody sees the food at the supermarket just surging. I mean, every day the prices are going up. So I think in 2 areas, your legislation would be very helpful. I just want to add to something you said. Jeff Bezos, the chairman of Amazon, only W-2 is $82,000. So he's not even paying the $447,000. So just some information for you.
Mr. Lawson, what impact would raising the retirement age to 70 years of age have on workers in this country?
So I don't want to get too in the weeds on the policy, but it's not like a benefit cut. Raising the retirement age is a benefit cut, 7% for each year you raise it. So raising the retirement age to 70 is just a 21% benefit cut. But it also has the added terribleness that it's putting the pressure not on millionaires and billionaires who are doing fine in this country, but on working people, on people working on the line, teachers, people who are on their feet, back-breaking laborers saying, oh, well, you're going to have to now work until you die. So you can't overstate how bad that effect would be on the American people.
Thank you. Let me ask Ms. McGinnis or Mr. Akabas a question, and that is, does it make sense to you that somebody who makes $700 million in a given year pays the same amount of money into Social Security as somebody who makes $147,000? Ms. McGinnis?
So what doesn't make sense to me is that Social Security isn't more progressive. And I think there are two ways we should think about doing that, because Social Security can only do so much without squeezing out other programs, which is what's already happening.
But if you could stay on answering my question. It's a simple question. Right now we have a cap of $147,000, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who makes $700 million pays the same as somebody who makes $147,000. Is that good policy? Does that make sense?
So it depends on your objectives of the program. I think it makes sense to lift that tax cap, and I also think it makes sense to reduce their benefits since they clearly don't need them.
Okay, Mr. Akabas?
I would agree with Ms. McGinnis. I think we need to look at Social Security in the context of the broader budget. And of course, we have a very progressive tax system overall, perhaps not progressive enough. But I think that I agree that there needs to be changes in terms of the revenues brought into the program, and some of that should come from those who can most afford to
Just
pay.
out of curiosity, do you think it's progressive when billionaires in a given year do not pay a nickel in federal income tax? Is that progressive?
No, I don't think that's progressive.
All right, Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Altman, does Senator Sanders propose a 12.4% Social Security tax on all income? Is it 6.2 or 12.4?
I'm sorry, you're asking the 12.4% on net investment income?
Yes.
As part of his proposal? Yeah, the idea is that...
No, it's just a question. It'd be a 12.4% tax, right?
That's how...
Tax as it is right
Okay.
now.
Correct.
Ms. McGinnis.
All income.
Ms. McGinnis. We have a cap on income subject to Social Security taxation, right?
Correct.
If we lifted and said you pay Social Security 12.4% on all income, what would the effective tax rate be for a millionaire in America?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, that's not correct. We're not talking about raising,
We're not? I'm
no,
sorry.
6.2% on all income.
Okay, well, I asked her, she said 12.4.
Well, ask me.
I'll
That's
ask
my
you.
bill.
It's 6.2. So why don't we do this? Why don't you bring your bill to the floor for a vote?
Great idea.
Mr. Lawson, do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Senator Sanders' bill should definitely be brought to the
I
floor
could
for a
not
vote.
agree more. So, Senator Schumer, in case you're watching, I challenge you to bring Senator Sanders' bill to the floor. He's a very sincere man. He's found a way, he thinks, to save Social Security. And all I ask in return is to vote on Senator Romney's bill. You'll have two approaches to how to solve this problem, and you're not going to do it. You're all talk. Prove me wrong. Ms. McGinnis, the Gang of Six did not take Senator Sanders' approach, did it?
For reforming Social Security, no, it didn't. It had a balanced plan that looked at revenue.
Did Simpson Bowles take this approach?
No, it did not.
Did the Greenspan Commission take this approach?
No, it did not.
Do you agree with that, sir?
Yes.
Okay. The approach that you're advocating is along the following lines. Raise the cap, right? More revenue. Raise the cap, right? Reduce benefits to the people who can afford to take less. Is that fair? Y'all both nodding, right? Okay. Adjust CPI. You're nodding.
Yep.
And that allows us to restructure the program to get the baby boomers through without going bankrupt. Does that make sense? Is that what we're talking about in general, Ms. McGinnis? Is
Yes.
that what we're talking about?
Yes, Senator, and I think we can also afford to do that while protecting those who are most vulnerable on the
And
program.
one thing you can do is actually have an enhanced benefit for people 80 and over at the lower ends of the economic spectrum. Is that correct?
Yes.
Count me in for that. So what I want to do is to do what other people have done in the past to bring us together. Mr. Lawson, this may come as a surprise to you, but you're not going to bring us together. So the bottom line is somebody's got to bring us together. I don't think this will be Mr. Lawson. So what I want to do is be brought together in a fashion like people before us. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill adjusted the age from 65 to 67, and it did buy us some time. That alone's not enough. Let's look at maybe doing it once again because we live longer. And if we don't need to do it, great. Count me in for raising the cap on income subject to Social Security taxation within reason. I don't want to have like 70% tax rates in America. But also count me in for people in my income level and my financial situation taking a smaller COLA or maybe a restructured benefit because I can afford it. That's what it's going to take to save Social Security. It's not going to be fixed by taxing the wealthy. That can be part of it. So I'm hoping, Senator Sanders, that we will have a vote of your plan and Senator Romney's plan, but then get on about the hard work of finding a solution that will get buy-in from both sides of the aisle. I really do believe it's possible if there's political will. To President Biden, things are not going well in America right now. Hopefully they'll get better. But you have an opportunity, President Biden, to do something along the lines of Reagan. President Obama, to his credit, tried very hard to bring us together on this topic. The Gang of Six, Simpson Bowles. So I would ask President Biden to form some kind of mechanism to get us all in a room to see if we can pound out a solution to buy us time to get the baby boomers through the system without the draconian choice of cutting benefits or dramatically raising taxes. And every day and every year we wait, it gets harder. So that's my 2 cents worth. I am willing to make compromises that I think will get us to where we need to be. Thank you very much for having this hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Based on seniority, Senator Scott goes next. Sorry, Senator Romney.
You done senior?
He's senior.
Would you like to go? You can go first. Yeah, you got here first. Thank you. I've got a mayor here waiting to meet with me, so I appreciate Senator Scott letting me jump ahead of him here. I do appreciate that. When I lost my election for president, a number of people came to me and said, what do you think about forming a think tank? It seems like failed politicians are anxious to stay involved in the process of government, and think tanks are the way to go. I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of think tanks we have. And I said, I don't think the problem in Washington is trying to come up with the answers. I don't think we need people to solve for numbers, because there's so many people that are doing that. The problem is how to get something done. We don't need more think tanks. We need more do tanks. How do you get something done? How do you get something accomplished? And Senator Sanders makes a wonderful plea, which many people agree with, the need for helping our seniors and providing better benefits for them and so forth. But recognize that his bill has no chance whatsoever of receiving a single Republican vote in either house. So it will not be passed. And he knows that. As a matter of fact, you all recognize that given the fact that for any legislation of scale to be passed requires Republicans and Democrats to work together. That's the nature of our democracy. We have a 50-50 Senate. Half of the American people voted for Republicans, half voted for Democrats. To get something done requires bipartisanship. So any proposal that's brought forward that is only supported by one party is a messaging bill. It's a campaign bill. It may be a fundraising bill. But one thing it's not is about to become a law. So if you want to have a law, you have to see if there's a way to get people working together. Now, our challenge with Social Security, like Medicare and the Highway Trust Fund, is exemplified by that chart, which is Social Security Trust Fund runs out of money in 3034. That's a problem. It's a problem for Social Security recipients. And of all the people who noticed it, the Washington Post said the Medicare and Social Security disaster that Washington is doing nothing to fix. It's not that the think tanks don't have proposals or that partisans on either side of the aisle can't come up with answers. It's that we've not taken action that actually could result in a solution. So I would suggest that that we find a way to actually get something done. Now, I'm pleased that my good friend Senator Graham spoke about the Trust Act and gave me some credit for that. It was introduced by myself and Senator Manchin, Republican and Democrat. Senator Warner is also on it. Your organization, sir, continues to say that it is designed to cut benefits. Why do you say that? Do you believe Senator Warner and Senator Manchin want to cut benefits?
So is that a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm basing it on, we were basically formed to fight the BS Commission.
I asked a question. The question is, do you believe that Senator Warner and Senator Manchin want to cut benefits? By the way, we have 5 Democrats who signed up on the Trust Act because it does this. It says, look, let's get groups together, half Republican, half Democrats, to work together to see if they can find a solution to save Social Security. And both sides have to agree. Both sides have to agree. No, I get to decide who asks the questions to. Both sides get to agree, have to agree, and in order for it to go to the floor to be voted on. So it's bipartisan. And every single person has said, under no circumstances will we cut benefits. And yet, you, in your documents, your organization keeps saying that we want to cut benefits, that we're going to cut benefits in the night. Untrue. Why do you say that?
If you're not going to cut benefits, then you're going to do it all on the revenue side, which would be something that we support. But going on the history of commissions in this town, what happens when politicians get behind closed doors is they talk about things that are deeply unpopular, like cutting Social Security.
We get behind closed. We don't just meet in hearings like this. We have meetings, private meetings, all the time. We get together and discuss things all the time. We had meetings last night. We have meetings right now on gun legislation. We had meetings last night on the Electoral Count Act. We have meetings all the time behind closed doors. We then have hearings. Then there are votes in public. So the idea is to have people come together, Republicans and Democrats, to see if we can find a solution. If we don't do that, we will not save Social Security. You realize you're a group dedicated to saving Social Security, but you realize that if we don't come up with a bipartisan solution, we will not save it. Do you understand that?
I recognize that the problem is the 23% benefit cut that you keep bringing up, but the solution that Republicans put forward is a 23% benefit cut. So that's not a solution. It's just the problem sooner.
Boy, that was not an answer. The Social Security Trust Fund goes away by 2034, at which point benefits are cut automatically. I'm not for that. I'm trying to keep that from happening. I don't want that to happen. But if we don't come up with a bipartisan solution, that's what will happen. That's what you're for. If you oppose bipartisanship, what solution do you have to actually solving Social Security on a bipartisan basis?
We would ask millionaires and billionaires to pay the same rate as the rest of Americans and not cut one penny of benefits.
I understand what your answer is. This is back to the think tank versus the do tank. What would you do to get bipartisanship? How are you going to get bipartisans to work together?
I would like the American people who bipartisanly, overwhelmingly don't want to see their benefits cut. I would like Republican politicians to have to answer to them about why they're...
We do every election, and the people who have elected us have said work on a bipartisan basis to find a solution. We can do that. We will do it. And I'll tell you, the disingenuous attack on Republicans is something which... By the way, just as Senator Graham said, what your approach is making it harder for us to find a solution to save Social Security. And that's something that desperately needs to be done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I just wanted to come by for a few minutes. This is a particularly important hearing and lay out what I think the choices are and what I believe are responsible solutions to those options. To me, we have a discussion of either cutting Social Security benefits or saving Social Security. And the leading proposal on the other side would put Social Security on the chopping block every few years, basically, I gather, to see if the American people still want it. And the fact of the matter is, the American people don't want benefits, cut. They understand what it will mean for working people to just raise the age, because we know, for example, we're getting this narrative that Americans by and large are living longer. That's just not the case, colleagues, for most Americans. The majority of increases in life expectancy have been to those in the top half of the income distribution. And meanwhile, Black and Hispanic workers, low-wage workers, workers without a college degree, and those working in physically demanding jobs have a lower life expectancy after age 65 and are more likely to claim Social Security benefits early. So, you have a choice, and I'm going to be very specific about what we believe the choice ought to be. Cut Social Security benefits? We're against that. We are plain, straightforward against that. Or we can look at the kind of solutions that the American people are for. And I'm going to outline those here in just a moment. But what we've heard from Republicans in the past is about privatizing it, cutting the benefits, raising the retirement age. The American people say, not interested, don't want to do that. Here's the two areas that I know the American people are for, because I'm trying these ideas out as I get around my state and I work with my colleagues. First, we know that billionaires are able, under current tax law, this is legal, the scam is what's legal, they are able to pay little or no taxes for years on end. Contrast that with firefighters and nurses. They pay taxes with every single paycheck. So I have proposed the billionaire income tax, which would mean that billionaires would pay taxes every year. And what we would do is take the revenue generated from this tax, it would be deposited into the Social Security Trust Fund, and you could extend solvency into the next century. Choice number one. Choice number two, we now have a tax gap of $1 trillion, according to the Commission of the Internal Revenue Service. Why? Because there are fewer audits of the most wealthy in America. Senator Sanders and I have talked about this. The working person, again, pays taxes with all their paychecks. Possible to audit them in a pretty straightforward way. The wealthy are disproportionately causing the tax cheating problem. And what I propose is we better fund the Internal Revenue Service so that we can go after these wealthy tax cheats. Now, what I've just given you are two very concrete ways to deal with the Social Security funding challenge, and they are ways that the American people will rally for. Because, and I'll close with this, the two ideas that I've just laid out ensure that we have some tax fairness and that we pay for what we want in a responsible kind of manner. I didn't just come here and say I'm going to Senator Sanders' hearing to say this is what I'm against. I told you what the choice is: cutting Social Security, saving Social Security. We're for saving Social Security. There is a history on the other side of the aisle of repeatedly trying to cut Social Security. And I said, in addition to telling you what our goal is, I gave you two concrete ways to go about securing that goal. And I will just tell my colleagues, both of these approaches will generate the revenue to get Social Security well into the next century, and these are approaches the American people are for. Thank you, Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Senator Wyden. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been here a little over 3 years, and I recall the first budget hearing that I was at. Senator Mike Enzi was the chair then. And when you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, it gets tired to listen. I agree that there are certain priorities we have as a government. I'd say defending our country would be up there. Attending to our infrastructure, which we all share, and entitlements. I think it's hard to make the argument that we do not need to keep this whole and healthy. But I also recall from that discussion that nothing ever gets done because there's no political will here to do it. On decisions like this, where you're dealing with a situation a lot more complicated now than it was even 3.5 years ago. We were 18 trillion in debt when I got here. We're 30, and imagine we got a blueprint out there that says we're going to be 45 trillion in debt in 10 years. That's not the context that any of this is going to work within, other than an academic discussion. That lack of political will of trading off spending for this versus that, which you've got to do everywhere else in our society. It's laughed at when you would ever use the metaphor of households. Let's use the metaphor of state and local governments. They have guardrails that force political will into doing what needs to be done. All I can tell you is we're not evolving into a place to where we're going to be able to do any of this, and it's going to go way beyond Social Security. Medicare Trust Fund goes broke in a little over 4 years. Senator Sanders and I are probably the two that talk about health care the most. Different points of view on what to do. It's a broken system. If we fixed health care alone, made it more transparent, made it more competitive, took it down to where it is across the rest of the world, which is closer to 11, 12, 13% of our GDP, we'd all of a sudden free up 5 to 6% of our GDP that you could then plow into whatever you want to prioritize. But as long as we don't do budgets, which we haven't done in 10 years, as long as we come up with gimmicks that we soon overturn, it doesn't look good for fixing what we're all here to talk about. When we're borrowing money from our kids and our grandkids, which is what we're doing now to run this biggest business in the world, you're not going to be in a position to fix maybe one of the most important things it does. I don't think we're going to get to the discussion of cutting benefits. I don't think that's probably the right place to be. I think it's how do you fix the system in general so you can keep at least what's there intact. And then, once you fix the problem overall, have the political will to zero in on what's most important. And we could do it. Senator Wyman's proposal, that may or may not flesh out some type of Band-Aid approach to it. What I'm talking about, fix health care. You free up the biggest part of our GDP. It acknowledges that regardless of the tax rates, look at this data, we generate 17.5% to 18% of our GDP in federal revenues. We got to look at the reality of what we can take in each year. If we don't, we're just ignoring the statistics. So I'm going to put a budget actually out on the floor so that Americans at least have something to look at. And that's going to happen in 2 to 3 weeks. It's going to be sensible. It's going to balance. It's going to acknowledge that for all the wonderful things we want to do here, most of them not hitting the target, We're discussing here how we want to add more benefits. Well, maybe that's what needs to be done, but you certainly aren't going to be able to do it and count on it unless we fix the underlying issues. We got to get back to budgets. We got to do it through regular order. And we got to acknowledge that the modern monetary theory, which means deficits and debt don't matter anymore, that's not a business plan. That'll take us into Chapter 11 someday, and even this place is not immune to that. And that budget that was put out there, we're going to be far deeper in the hole than 45 trillion when you've underestimated inflation and the cost of interest. I put it out there because this is a valid discussion. The elderly that work their entire life thinking that their retirement and their health care is going to be there, that's in peril. And that's all due to us. It's due to how the system has evolved to this point, the fact we have no political will, and yes, we do have to make trade-offs. And until we can get the budget balanced, we're never going to be able to say with honesty and certainty that we can do anything to help Social Security in the long run. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Senator Braun. If I might make a correction to what you said. You thought that we spend 17 to 18% of our GDP on healthcare. Wrong. It's close to 20%.
No, I said those are federal revenues, regardless of our tax rate.
I'm sorry, but
yeah.
In fact, we are spending a fortune on healthcare. You're right. We spend twice as much per capita as any other country.
We do. And if we take that down, no, and when it comes to healthcare, that's the biggest sector of our economy.
Right, and it's close to 20% of our GDP.
And no, you are right. It's approaching 20. It's 17 to 18 recently. It's 12 to 13 in most other countries.
That's right.
And that's where you get that 6 to 7% savings. That's the only real place that we can grab real funds. And yes, I actually understated that a little bit. And I was also talking about the federal revenues that we have to work with. It's in that same range, and we got to be realistic there as well.
Okay, thank you. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here for a hearing to discuss how we can strengthen and preserve Social Security, which I think we all agree has been a critical program, anti-poverty program, retirement program, disabilities program for tens of millions of people in our country. And I want to commend Senator Sanders for his legislation, which would extend the solvency of Social Security by 75 years. We all know that around 2033, 2034, we're going to hit a cliff. And if we don't do anything, you're going to see between a 22 and 25% reduction in benefits. And while there are certain provisions in the bill that I would do differently, I'm supporting and a co-sponsor of Senator Sanders' effort because I think it's a good faith proposal on the table to actually do something right now. I've also supported other efforts like Social Security 2100 and provisions taking some of increasing the estate tax and putting some of those funds into strengthening Social Security. So I just have a very simple question. I'm going to start with Ms. Altman. Do we have the luxury of waiting for another 9 years before we fix it, or should we fix this thing now?
It's part of what Social Security provides is not just cash benefits, but a sense of security, peace of mind. And for that reason, acting sooner rather than later is the right thing to do.
You know, I agree. I mean, we have gotten closer to the cliff in the past, but right now we're facing quite a potential shortfall if we don't do anything. Mr. Roach, the average benefit right now is $1,540 a month for most Americans. And my question to you is that enough to both provide affordable housing, cost of medicine, food, and other essentials?
Absolutely not. It's not enough. Out of that amount of money you spoke about, let's say it's like $18,000 a year. $5,000 goes automatically to co-pays and prescription drugs and supplemental plans. So basically, that amount of money, with that amount of money alone, people are in poverty. They start out retirement in poverty. It's inadequate. It needs to be increased substantially.
And that, of course, would be cut by somewhere between 22 and 25% if we don't do anything right now. Ms. McGinnis, thank you for your testimony. We've worked on lots of issues, and we are trying on the Build Back Better piece to salvage a portion of it. dealing with clean energy and prescription drug costs, and to pay for it by closing some big tax loopholes that big corporations are right now exploiting, and some very wealthy individuals, and not only pay for it, but as you know, try to achieve some deficit reduction in the process. I hope we get there. So I've worked on this issue for a very long time, as you have. I served on the ill-fated super committee. I worked really hard on the super committee to try to address the Social Security fiscal solvency issue. We didn't get there. I agree with Senator Braun. I mentioned in one of our early hearings in this committee that I believe it's a matter of political will. And I understand the Trust Act. We can set up a process for trying to get there. We of course, tried that with Simpson-Bowles. We tried that with the super committee. And at the end of the day, I do believe it's a question of political will. And what Senator Sanders has done is put together a plan on the table, open to everybody firing at it. People don't like it, they can say why they don't like it. But it seems to me the beginning of this conversation needs to be an alternative plan from our Republican colleagues. Put your plan on the table so we can discuss it, not something discussed behind closed doors through some bipartisan effort. I'm for a bipartisan solution, but that has to begin by somebody on the Republican side also putting together their plan. Let people look at it. Let the American people take shots at it, just like they can take shots at the plan Sanders has put forward and others. So don't you think, Ms. McGinnis, that we should see in a transparent fashion an alternative plan introduced by Republican colleagues or a bipartisan group or whatever that says here's a different way to do it than the Sanders plan?
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. I think that's a great point. I think that makes sense. Senator Sanders should be commended for putting forth a plan that reaches, I think, 75-year solvency. I haven't seen the details yet, but that's great. I would quibble with a lot of details, but agreed. So we could have another plan from the Republican side and work to come up with the compromises, because it absolutely does have to be bipartisan. We can't get this done with just one party or the other. The only thing I would say, and this comes from my observations of this hearing, is that there is so much talk about us and them. There is so much performative exaggeration on this podium that we have sat through. And our country is so polarized, and we are in such trouble right now. I'd really like to sit down with a group of Republicans and Democrats and work on this together as well. So I appreciate all you've done on this for many, many years. And I think that proposal is great. We would work with any Republicans to come up with a proposal. But it's also time to do this as members of Congress who are the fiduciaries for the program. That's my plea to all of you.
No, I appreciate that. But again, I think having been through this process and trying to build better mousetraps for getting there in the past, I do think it begins with putting proposals on the table that people are willing to be tested by their peers, their colleagues, and the public, and then go forward. And that's what, and I appreciate your commending Senator Sanders for putting together a good faith effort. I'd like to see other good faith efforts from people who disagree with the Sanders approach. I agree with the overall thrust of the proposal he's put forward, but we'd like to see other ideas.
We will work on trying to get some of those out there.
Thank
you. Good to have two bookends then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. There are a few things more important than protecting and preserving America's fundamental safety net programs, specifically Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. As we all have seen, career politicians in Washington have ignored them for decades, putting them at an incredible risk. Some have even advocated to cut spending for these programs. President Biden is part of that crowd. In fact, Chairman, you focused heavily on Joe Biden's attacks on Social Security and Medicare during your campaign for president in 2020. Your vocal criticism of President Biden's record of attacking Social Security and Medicare is how I know you agree with me that spending cuts on these programs have no business being entertained here in the U.S. Senate. I'm glad we're talking about these programs today, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. Social Security is projected to run out in 12 or 13 years. Medicare Part A will begin to run out in just 4 years. Medicaid costs continue to skyrocket. It's become a bigger and bigger part of the federal budgets. It's clear that what we're doing is not working, so I think we all could agree it's time to act. I propose that Congress regularly review all these programs. Of course, some of my colleagues and some of the people testifying today have decided to lie about what I've been proposing. So let's be clear. I'm never going to support cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And outside of Joe Biden, I don't know too many other folks in Washington that want to see these programs be cut or go away either. Some of the panelists may not know that Congress regularly reviews essential programs and functions of the federal government and should regularly review essential programs and functions of the federal government. As you know, we don't even vote on Social Security and on Medicare, which makes no sense. For 61 consecutive years, Congress has successfully passed the National Defense Authorization Act. The NDA sets the budget for the entire Department of Defense. It is a critical series of must-pass national security and defense budget laws that Congress has never failed to approve, not even once. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are no different. If we want these programs to survive and further to avoid any cuts to benefits, we need to act today. With that said, I have a few questions. Ms. McGinnis, while both trustee reports represent modest improvements from last year, this is mainly because of its outdated and unrealistic economic assumptions. For example, CRFB noted that the Social Security trustees projected a 3.8% cost of living adjustment for next year, which would require about a 6% annualized deflation over the next few months. So, Ms. McGinnis, can you tell me how the trustees' report findings would have been different if their economic assumptions were accurate and actually reflected the historic inflation we are currently seeing?
Yeah, that's right. They had to lock in the economic conditions earlier, so we didn't see how they weren't able to see that inflation would be as high as it is. What this will translate is into significantly higher COLA for seniors. We heard a lot today about Social Security benefits not keeping up with inflation, and that's not the case. It's actually one of the programs that's automatically indexed for both wages and prices, so in many ways it grows quite significantly. But we will see bigger COLAs than they're estimating, and that means that we could even see a sooner insolvency date than is predicted in the current report.
Thank you. Mr. Ukopeth, according to last week's report from Social Security trustees, the Social Security trust funds will deplete their reserves in 2035, only 13 years from now. After that, Social Security will legally only be able to pay, I think it's about 77% of scheduled benefits. The Medicare trustees report estimates that the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund will be insolvent in just 6 years by 2028 and run deficits of $530 billion over the next decade. This is clearly unacceptable, and fixing the dire financial situations of these programs will require congressional and presidential leadership, not just political gimmicks, like the chairman has suggested today, which he knows will never happen. The last time the OMB director testified in front of this committee, I asked her what OMB and the Biden administration were doing to address the threatened state of Medicare and Social Security that threatens millions of constituents in my state. You know what her answer was? Nothing. She couldn't give me anything that they were doing. This is also unacceptable and shows how unserious Biden and the Democrats are about preserving Medicare and Social Security. Social Security and Medicare are facing serious challenges, but this hearing is, I don't believe, a good faith example to explore solutions. I agree with you. We ought to have proposals on both sides, and we shouldn't be attacking everybody and be lying about things they put out. I think we have to start talking about what we're going to do to fix this. And when people lie about when somebody says, "Oh, we ought to have a real good discussion about this," I think it's inappropriate. So do you agree that presidential leadership is going to be required to be able to solve both Social Security and Medicare?
Yes, absolutely, Senator. I think we need leadership from both the administration as well as Congress, and we need more proposals on the table because this is such a critical issue for the American people. And I'm encouraged by the fact that there are many members that are working on this behind the scenes and hoping that that continues momentum over time.
Have you seen one proposal out of the Biden administration?
I have not, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. We now have via video Senator Padilla. Senator Padilla, Alex, you there?
I am here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Social Security is one of the most effective programs in our nation's history, and we are at a critical crossroads to determine whether we will build upon its success. As you've pointed out, Mr. Chairman, Social Security lifts more Americans out of poverty than any other program. Since its inception, it has reduced the poverty rate for seniors from about 50% to less than 9%. Without Social Security, more than 22 million Americans, including 16 million seniors and nearly 1 million children, would have lived below the poverty line in 2020. However, despite the enormous success of Social Security, tens of millions of seniors are still struggling to get by. And many workers fear that they will not be able to afford to retire when they reach retirement age. So rather than following the plans offered by some of our Republican colleagues, and yes, we're just going to be honest about this, some of our Republican colleagues have offered plans to cut Social Security benefits. I believe we have an opportunity and an obligation to strengthen Social Security for the next century. That's why I was proud to join you, Mr. Chairman, in introducing the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this legislation would not only keep Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, but it would also expand benefits for current and future beneficiaries, ensuring that more Americans can live and retire with dignity. It's important to remember that Social Security benefits are earned and are a promise to workers that future generations will support them, just as current workers have supported generations of workers in the past. These benefits must be protected and they must be strengthened. And now I do have a couple quick questions for the witnesses. So the first is regard to the need to expand benefits for seniors. Even with Social Security, more than 5 million seniors in the U.S. live in poverty. Roughly 1 in 7 seniors rely on Social Security for more than 90% of their income. And over the past 30 years, the number of Americans who are at risk of not being able to maintain their standard of living in retirement age has increased, not decreased. So I think we must expand Social Security so that every American can retire with dignity, the dignity they have earned through their years and years of hard work. That's why the Social Security Expansion Act would raise the benefits for current and future beneficiaries and do so in a responsible way. We want to ensure that those benefits keep up with the cost of living and do so by ensuring that millionaires and billionaires pay their fair share. My question is this, for Mr. Roach, why are these proposed expanded benefits so important for the millions of current and future retirees who will rely upon them?
They're very important because our seniors today are hurting. They're in very serious pain, as we discussed. They can't afford to buy sufficient food, medicine, housing. Everything has become more difficult for them. And I think what some people may not realize is that when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill got together, we have a whole different situation now. What we have is it was a systematic extermination of defined benefit plans in this country. And through corporate bankruptcies, the people who have planned to work, who plan to retire in a certain lifestyle, are unable to do so because of that systematic extermination of those pension plans. So in Chairman Sanders' proposal, that would sort of bridge the gap somewhat. Not totally, but it needs to be expanded. And the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen to you in the future, this would help with that anxiety. So I think that those proposals need to be enacted as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you for that. One additional question, Mr. Chairman. We already know Social Security is a very successful program, and the Social Security Administration is actually one of the most efficient agencies in the federal government, spending less than 1% of the benefits paid each year on administration. Unfortunately, attacks on the administrative funding have made it more difficult for the Social Security Administration to provide adequate service to the American people. Since 2010, the administration's workload has grown as the number of beneficiaries has increased by 21%. During the same period, the administration's operating budget has been reduced by 17% when accounting for inflation, and its staff has shrunk by 13%. So it's unacceptable when nearly half of all calls to the Social Security Administration go unanswered. And just as your staff and my staff and the staff of our colleagues in congressional offices stand ready to support our constituents when they need help accessing the Social Security Administration, we need to support the administration through resources so they can best serve the public. Ms. Altman, why is ensuring robust funding for the Social Security Administration essential to improving constituent service to individuals, families, and communities that rely on the Social Security Administration?
Thank you so much for that question. The field offices all across the country, the 1,200 field offices in every congressional district, are really like the post offices, the face of the federal government. People go there at particular times of vulnerability. They may have just lost a spouse and have to claim survivor's benefits. They may have just found themselves so disabled that they no longer can work. They may be aging and have decided to end work. And what you want in those kinds of situations is compassionate care where the administration has the time to really work with people. The people at the Social Security Administration, the workers, are extremely dedicated to the American people. They work very, very hard. But as you've pointed out in your question, they are extremely underfunded. And it's really important to increase that funding. You all know, because your congressional services get many calls from constituents. And what we really need is to have better training for people, more hiring. We've got a lot of attrition. A lot of people are at the point where they're retiring. So absolutely, the Social Security Administration needs much more funding.
Well, Senator Padilla, I wanted to thank you for raising that issue. That is an issue above and beyond the funding of Social Security benefits. But the truth is, in Vermont, and I'm gathering in California, people are not getting the kind of help and responses from the Social Security Administration that they need. So it's a very, very important issue, and I appreciate you raising it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let me just do this. Let me thank the panelists. I just want to say a couple of things, then we're going to hear from C Goss, who is the head actuary for the Social Security Administration. There has been a lot of talk about the need of bipartisanship to solve the issue, and I agree. But you know what? There is something even more important, and that is the need to listen to the American people and to respond to what the American people want. So when we talk about bipartisan, the assumption is that Congress actually listens and reflects what the American people want, and I think that that is not accurate. I think to too large a degree, Congress is beholden to powerful special interests and not the needs of ordinary Americans. I think if you went out there today, and I think polling makes this very, very clear, if you ask the American people, should we cut Social Security benefits, raise the retirement age, there is a very loud no on the part of the American people. If you ask the American people, should we ask the wealthiest in our country to contribute more into the Social Security Trust Fund, the answer is a loud yes. Should we increase benefits for Social Security? The answer is a yes as well. So I am all in favor of bipartisanship. But in fact, what is more important is that we start listening to the American people and do what they want, not listen to powerful special interests who do not reflect where the American people are at. And with that, let me very much thank all five of our panelists. Thank you very much for your testimony and being with us today. Our next panelist is Mr. Stephen C. Goss. Mr. Goss is the Chief Actuary of the Social Security Administration. He joined the office of the Chief Actuary in 1973 and has been Chief Actuary since 2001. Mr. Goss is a member of the Society of Actuaries, the American Academy of Actuaries, and the National Academy of Social Insurance. Mr. Goss, thank you very, very much. Mr. Goss is going to be with us virtually. We thank him very much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanders. I hope I'm audible at this point.
You are. You're great.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for the invite, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Graham, and all the members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We do have some picture board. I think if somebody is doing that, if they could put up slide number 2, that would be great. This is just a reminder that the new trustees report that came out exactly a week ago, as several have mentioned, has updated our projections for the next 75 years and the near term. And the objective of the trustees reports, which by the way have been produced every single year without fail starting 1941 for this program, have provided to the Congress, the intent is to provide to Congress the financial and actuarial status of the funds for the future, indicating to what extent, if there is a shortfall, there will be a shortfall when and to what degree, thereby giving guidance to members of Congress and the administration as to what kinds of changes might be needed in order to put us back into good financial position. I'm very happy that there was mention of some of the work done in the past for Social Security, and having been around as long as I have, as you indicated, Senator Sanders, I worked very closely with the Greenspan Commission in 1982, as did my entire office, and with a conference committee for the 1983 amendments in 1983, and also with the Simpson Bowles and other commissions since. And let me just say that working with your staff, Senator Graham's staff, and the staff of virtually everybody on your committee, we've had the great pleasure of working with you in developing proposals and scoring them for making progress in the future. So if you could just flip to the next slide or the next panel, this simply just indicates a little bit of an indication of what the change is for this year's trustees report. The shortfall is a percentage of taxable payroll for that, which is the current tax base for Social Security. And last year's trustees report was projected at 3.54% of taxable payroll. It's a little bit better at 3.42% of taxable payroll this year. And let me just mention that over the context of the entire next 75 years, the shortfall of Social Security's revenues in order to pay completely for all of the scheduled benefits and law is about 1.2% of GDP. So the shortfall is not enormous, but it is substantial and is something that needs to be addressed. So on the next panel, if we could pop that up, this simply indicates something that you already have seen and have talked about quite a bit, which is the projected point in time at which we believe the trust fund reserves will become depleted. And this is critical. Social Security cannot run out of money. It cannot go bankrupt, but its reserves can become depleted, at which point it would not be able to pay the full scheduled benefits. And in the most recent trustees report, we have pushed out the old age and survivors insurance trust fund reserve depletion date by 1 year because of the experience that we have had over the past year. And by the way, while it is true that price inflation is higher than had been registered by the trustees back in mid-February when we set the assumptions, employment has also improved faster than expected. And I can give you a little forewarning that the average wage in the year 2021 is also growing, is being measured to grow considerably faster than we estimated in the trustees report. So these items will very likely balance each other out and will not result in a worse financial projection than we have in the 2022 trustees report. The disability insurance trust fund is quite a different story because of the recent experience and expectations of lower disability incidence rates than have been assumed for the past several years. We are projecting that the Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund will be fully financed even under current law going out for the next 75 years. Now, on the next panel, we can see that the cost and the revenue for Social Security as a percentage of our tax base, taxable payroll, is such that the cost is rising fairly significantly between 2008 and 2030. And that is what is really contributing towards our depleting our reserves and reaching the point where we would only be able to pay out 80% of scheduled benefits under current law in 2035, and that would drop down towards 74% without any action, without any changes in law. But on the next slide, we get to what are the two major factors, which are the reasons. When we have an issue to address, it's always good to know what is causing the issue that we have to address. The first and most important one, and I think Senator Graham indicated this earlier, is the changing age distribution of our population. And since the end of the baby boom period in 1965, birth rates have been lower, and that has caused a fundamental change in the age distribution of the population. And we are therefore, as the baby boom generation retires and is replaced in working ages by lower birth rate generations, we're having a dramatic increase over time in the number of people over 65 versus working age 20 to 64. The little lines below the red and blue indicate that had the birth rates not dropped from the 3 or 3.0 level per woman that we had had during the baby boom, and basically really for really generations before that, you can see what this age distribution would look like. It would be rising only very slightly because of increasing longevity and or birth rates. So our fundamental problem really derives from the changing in birth rates. But there's one other factor that is worth paying attention to on the next slide, on the next panel, which indicates that, yes, we do have a taxable maximum level. And the taxable maximum since about 1983 has been rising by the average wage growth in our economy. And that has maintained us having about 6% of all workers in the economy having earnings above the taxable maximum, and therefore 94% having earnings below the taxable maximum, and therefore paying on all of their earnings. But the interesting part of this is that because of the changing distribution of earnings, with the highest earners having much higher increases in the past, we have seen a change from 1983 to 2000. Over that period, going from that top 6% of workers receiving 9% of all covered earnings up to 16% of all covered earnings, and it's been relatively stable since that time. This fundamental shift really has put a lot of pressure on the trust funds. On the next panel, if I may, let me just indicate very quickly that the next panel indicates something we refer to as benefit replacement rates. It simply indicates the percentage of your career average earnings that would be provided by Social Security. And you can see for the lowest earners, it provides more, and for the highest earners, it provides less. In the future, we're projecting about, for people starting their benefits in retirement at age 65, it'd be about 50% for very low earners, and it'd be about 25% for very high earners. However, on the right-hand panel, you see what will happen to those benefits if we do not make changes in law and we solve the Social Security shortfall solely by having less benefits payable. I should just remind also that financial planners consistently tell people that they should seek to have 75 to 80% of their prior to retirement earnings covered in retirement. And you can see that Social Security will pay out at most about 50%. So in addition to financing Social Security, obviously we have to stress people having other sources of income. On the very last panel, let me just indicate what I think has already been stated, that in order to fix the imbalance that we have going forward into Social Security, we're going to have legislation by 2035, hopefully well before that, and we're going to have to either increase our scheduled revenue by about a third by that time, or reduce the scheduled benefits by a quarter, or some combination of the two. And again, I would just say that I'm very much looking forward to our office being able to work with all of you, and want to commend, by the way, both Senator Sanders and Senator Graham for their efforts back in 2011 when we worked with them on bills that would have at that time extended the projected solvency of Social Security fully 75 years. Very different approaches, but at least they both came to the same end result of extending solvency for 75 years. So we're happy to have worked, Senator Sanders, with you and your staff on the latest bill, which was just introduced today, which through a combination of factors will again have the prospect of extending solvency out to 75 years.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Sorry for running over on time.
No, that's okay. And thank you very much, Mr. Goss, for your work in general and for so many years. And thank you very much for the analysis you did of the legislation that I and others have just introduced. I just, we're going to be pretty brief and want to have you confirm or not my understanding of your analysis of our legislation. It is my understanding that the Social Security Administration has found that the legislation I've introduced today would expand benefits across the board starting in 2023. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It is my understanding that the Social Security Administration has found that if this bill were signed into law, Social Security would be solvent for more than 75 years. Is that correct?
That is, in fact, the conclusion that our office comes to based on the baseline projections recently developed with our Board of Trustees.
It is my understanding that the Social Security Administration has found that if this bill were signed into law, the bottom 93% of Americans would not see their payroll taxes go up by 1 penny. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, it might even be closer to the bottom 94%.
In other words, what you are confirming is that this legislation would expand Social Security benefits and fully fund Social Security for more than 75 years by demanding that the very wealthiest people in this country pay more in taxes. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct, Senator Sanders, and I would just add that, as I think you have indicated very clearly, your bill that was introduced today would not only expand revenue by the payroll tax above $250,000 earnings level, but also would, in fact, bring some new tax to the trust funds based on investment income.
Right.
And the combination of those provide the amount of revenue to end up getting us this result.
That's correct. Okay, Mr. Goss, thank you so much. Appreciate the work you have done and your being with us today. And with that, before we close, I would like to ask unanimous consent, which is not going to be hard to get given everyone else is here, that 3 statements be entered into the record. One is a set of estimates of the Social Security Expansion Act prepared by Steve Goss and his team at the Social Security Administration. The other statements are letters of support from AFSCME and the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. And without objections, so ordered. And let me just conclude by thanking all of the witnesses for being with us today. As information for all senators, questions for the record are due by 12 noon tomorrow, with signed hand copies delivered to the committee clerk at Dirksen 624. Email copies will also be accepted. Under our rules, the witnesses will have 7 days from receipt of our questions to respond with answers. And with no further business, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.